usually say good evening, but I guess I can say good afternoon because we're starting a little bit earlier today. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors meeting. It is Wednesday, August 25th, 2021. This is our first meeting of the 21-22 school year. So welcome back. Brady is joining us as the student rep. We told him that he is on board until the election happens at Freeport High School, which hopefully he'll stay on with us, but in the meantime, he's here, so thank you for joining us. We also have a new board member from Pownell. As you guys recall, in June, Pownell does their elections for the school board, and so Jill Piker is our newest board member, so welcome. Thank you for being able to be here this evening. And Jeremy is not, unfortunately, with us this evening, but we will get started in the meantime with the Pledge of Allegiance. So typically this is our board retreat meeting, but given the reopening plan and our need to address that and vote on that this evening, we do have a portion of public, a typical board meeting. So we're going to do that first, and then we'll move on to our board retreat. I don't believe we have any adjustments to the agenda. We do not. Okay. So we will move right into new business. For the reopening plan.
Thank you.
No, we won't. Sorry. Public comment. Public comment is before the new business. Sorry about that. I'm a little rusty. We haven't done this since June, so I apologize. So we are back to in-person meetings with the emergency state of emergency lifted, and we don't currently have a policy in place for remote participation in our meetings. So we're back to in person. So if we have anybody who is interested in sharing any comments, we welcome you to come up to the microphone and just give us your name, where you're from, and anything to share. I'm looking, I think it's all administrators in the crowd this evening or this afternoon. But if anybody has anything they want to say? Going once? Going twice? Okay. Now we will move on to new business and the reopening plan.
Thank you. I'm happy to present our reopening plan to you tonight. There's only been one revision from the draft that has been put out there, and that's around the pool testing. And in your packet, I think Jenny has placed something that says elementary green level. And you will see that at the very bottom of it, which is all of what you have, it says there's been one sentence that's been added that says pool testing. And it says pool testing will be available to families at DCS, PES, MSS, and MLS. So that's the addition that we have. This plan is a revision of last year's plan. The primary goal of this plan is to keep students in school for 5 days a week, in-person learning, and to reduce the need to quarantine. So what I'm going to highlight this afternoon are really the differences between last year's plan and this year's plan. In this year's plan, there is no hybrid model. We will pivot between the green and the red. Red will be used when classes, grade levels, or schools need to learn remotely due to quarantining. And we hope that this is very rare this year. In this plan, we are requiring masking to begin the year. Like most districts in our vicinity, we will require all students and staff, regardless of vaccination status, to wear masks indoor. As you know, there is a federal state mandate requiring the masking on buses and vans and other modes of transportation. So that's not optional. Masks may be removed outdoors while eating or drinking or on mask breaks indoors. Those that are recommending required masking include the Maine Center for Disease Control, the Federal Center for Disease Control, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Maine Academy of Pediatrics, the Maine Department of Education, the Maine Commissioner of Education, the Maine Education Association. And I'm happy to report Anne Marie Spizzuco, one of the co-presidents, is here tonight. The RSU 5 Coastal Education Association, local pediatricians, and our own school physician, Dr. Phelps. I also considered the following when reaching this recommendation around masking. Children under 12 cannot yet be vaccinated. The Delta variant can still infect those who are vaccinated. It is also more contagious, and community transmission has unfortunately increased in our state and around the country. We want to do our part to slow the community spread. While masking may not be 100% effective at preventing spread of infection, the benefits far outweigh the harms, in my opinion. If masks are not mandated, children who are immunocompromised or who have an immunocompromised family member will be at higher risk. We all want our children to be in school as much as possible. The rise in anxiety and depression in children related to the pandemic has increased. Masking will increase the chances of avoiding infections, avoiding school closures for quarantine, and having as normal a school year as possible. Parents need to be able to continue to work. When families lose jobs and income and housing, parental stress increases, and this adversely impacts our students. Masking our largest unvaccinated population, our young students, will reduce the risk of having to quarantine and reduce days out of work and school. Pooled testing. We have changed our thinking around this. We now want to offer this at the elementary level, at least until the vaccination comes available. We will get this up and running as soon as possible. Our application has been accepted, and so I do not think that this will take more than a week or so to become available to families. Our current thinking is not to offer it at FMS. This may change once we are up and running in the other schools, depending on the cases, and also the same at FHS. We will continue to reevaluate that. Required vaccinations. At this time, I am not recommending required vaccines of staff. It seems, based upon our latest data, that as of this afternoon is 97.2% of our staff that have replied to the survey are vaccinated. We've had 321 respondents out of approximately 433 staff. Data released yesterday from the DOE and DHHS on our students shows that of those eligible, 90 to 94% of our students have been vaccinated. The vaccine is widely available and remains the best approach to protecting the health of our children and maintaining 5-day-a-week in-person learning. There are no mandated distancing requirements, but of course we will distance as much as possible. Maine CDC guidance encourages us to provide at least 3 feet whenever possible, and we will follow that guidance when we can without compromising our learning environment. I recommend at this time that we not create the criteria for when we will unmask. If we create it and the state comes out in a week with something different, then I think it places us in an awkward situation. I recommend that we revisit masking around Indigenous Peoples Day and see how it's going and see what the latest data is telling us. I've received a few questions. One of the questions that I've received, what are Dr. Phelps's thoughts on pool testing? I spoke to her today. She's away on vacation, but we had a good conversation. She said she has mixed feelings about this. She's concerned about the amount of work it creates. The more people who opt out of pool testing will decrease the strength of the infections, avoiding school closures for quarantine. And she just wants us to have as normal a school year as possible. Whoops, I think I went to the wrong page there. Excuse me on that. One of the other things she said, if there's a positive case, then we know that it necessitates rapid testing. With required masking, she doesn't feel like it's as beneficial for us as it is for the school districts where they're not requiring masking. Another question was, what are her thoughts on requiring vaccines? She thinks that it's fabulous, but probably not practical. And then I think I have shared with you that she is in full support of us requiring mandatory mask. I received a question from one of the parents about why I didn't survey the parents about whether they wanted masking or not. I do not believe this is a survey question. I try not to ask questions that, I try not to do surveys where we're not going to follow the results of the survey. As you remember, we surveyed around the renaming of the high school. I think that's an appropriate thing to survey about. We surveyed about whether parents preferred half-day pre-K or 2.5 full days. Well, half day's not a full day, but 2 full days, doing it that way, because we really kind of wanted to see what they thought and then go with what the majority were wanting. I know that if I surveyed parents that, like across the rest of the state, that we would be split. I do not like to do surveys when I think it just creates more division in the community. So this is my recommendation to the board. There are some parents that would like to see the studies saying that masks are effective, that I haven't posted studies. I follow the recommendations of the CDC and the DOE, which we've done in the past, but I have asked Dr. Phelps whether she has some of this research readily available, and she's going to send me some of those studies, and I'll post those in the upcoming weeks. I had the questions about whether we can mandate students to be vaccinated. I consulted our legal counsel on this, and they told me today that we can, but they feel certain that that no one has, and it would probably end up in litigation. So I think the board should be aware of that, because we can definitely require masks as it's a means to protect the health and safety of the staff and students entrusted in our care. Can you mandate staff to be vaccinated was another question that I received. And yes, we can. There is a little bit of a difference in opinion between our legal counsel and I think the state MEA. The state MEA says that it needs to be negotiated. Our legal counsel that is not their opinion. I have been in contact with our association, and it's not that they're opposed to that, but I think we're both wondering what it's going to gain us. If we have 97% people of our staff vaccinated and we have a shortage in many of our positions, I'm not sure that I don't believe that the benefits are outweighing the cons. So at this point, I would not recommend mandating vaccinations for either our staff or students. And I think those are all of the questions, unless you want to read. We had some questions that came in late today, and I think I might be able to answer a couple of them.
Okay. They seem to be mostly centered around the pool testing. Some of them logistical questions, it seems like. So at the district level, who from the medical field is helping to implement the pool testing plan?
Okay, so our nurses will be helping to implement that. And also, we are planning on hiring additional staff in each of the schools, because a lot of it's almost like clerical work, where you're just taking the samples and shipping it off and then tracking all of that. So each of the administrators will be identifying staff that will be willing to work additional time and be paid. It would be most likely hourly people.
Okay. Will the school nurses be running and overseeing the pool testing? I think you said yes.
Yes.
Okay. Will they have additional support and resources? Sounds like yes. If Concentric, who I assume is the third party that we contract with, is unable to provide nursing support weekly, will we be allocating additional resources to hire for, I mean, it sounds like, do they have staff on site?
So that they have said that they can help provide staff. There's been a lot of discussion at the Cumberland County Superintendent's Group about this. And, you know, we've decided that we would just prefer to hire in-house people that we already have rather than to go through Concentric.
Okay. And then the other questions were around the Binex testing, which I believe is the rapid testing you alluded to. It says, if we were to offer the Binex testing now in schools for symptomatic kids, what happens if the sick child tests negative with the antigen test at school? Do they still have to go home? So if we had rapid tests and we gave it to a child and it came back negative, but they still had symptoms, would we send them home anyway?
Well, I think that would be on a case-by-case basis, and the nurse would be talking to the parent and the administrator in the building, because obviously we've made it, I think, clear that we want people that are, whether it's COVID or not, if you're sick, we do not want either staff or students at school.
Yep, okay. Are they instructed to call their PCP? I imagine the answer is usually yes for that.
Many
right?
times,
Yep.
yes.
Can they return the next day if they still have symptoms? And
It would depend on what the symptoms are and what we think that those symptoms are being caused from. So, I mean, if the doctor deems, or even the nurse deems, that we think it's due to someone having allergies, they would be allowed to return the next day.
so the alternative diagnosis piece?
Yes.
Okay. And then are we following the DOE guidelines or the main AAP guidelines when it comes to sick children? I'm not sure if they're
Yes.
different, if they're asking one versus the other, or, so the understanding is.
You know what, I want to retract that answer. I don't know if the AAP is the same, and the main DOE did revise their self-check to try to screen out for allergies. So I don't know the answer to that one.
Okay. And then I think the last one here was, does RSU 5 have a COVID advisory panel? And I think the answer is no.
Not in the way that some districts created one last summer, where they got local community members with health officials. We really relied on Dr. Phelps coming to a lot of our nursing meetings, and we used the nursing staff and her expertise to guide us.
Okay. Thank you. Susanna.
Thank you. I got one question, again, late coming through. But can you talk about, with the not having that intermediate yellow level and having just the green and the red, students who are quarantining for 10 days or so, what happens to their education during that time?
So I'll probably have to have the principals speak at each level. So I'll give them a minute to do the rock, paper, scissors to decide who's going to, because I think at each level the plan differs a little bit. And I think it even did in hybrid. But of course, we're so much further along with what we know that we really didn't want to do the kind of hybrid instruction. So well, we'll start at the high school because Charlie, that's you. There's no one to flip the coin with there, right? So the question becomes that if a student has to quarantine,
Yes.
but they're healthy, what is the plan if the rest of the kids are in a green? So, I mean, obviously, if we have a whole class home, they
Yeah.
would be getting instruction together. But I'm thinking this is for the random student that might be the one that was sitting right beside the student that ended up testing positive.
That's
That isn't
right.
vaccinated.
Well, yeah, and it's nice to see everybody. How you doing? Hope you're having a good summer. A few more days of it, anyway. So if we are in green, and the rest of the school is in green, and somebody has to be at home in quarantine because of a COVID-19, maybe a close contact, or maybe they have symptoms, that student would be going online, using Google Classroom to stay with their class. If a whole class was at home quarantine, a whole English class, say, or something like that, that class would receive remote, synchronous instruction. So I hope that answers the question.
So can I push a little bit on that, Charlie?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they go under their Google Classroom, but
Right.
nothing is necessarily synchronous. So how do they stay up on missing all of the lectures? Is there a plan for that?
So they would be in contact with their teacher to
Okay.
stay up on that stuff as if it was just an individual. But if it was a whole class, it would be synchronous instruction.
Okay. Jill?
Could you explain what is the criteria for the quarantine going into this year?
Well, I believe, and Becky, please jump in here, we're going to have, close contacts that are within, last year was 3 feet of other students, and it's going to depend on vaccination status. And I think if they are vaccinated and masked, then they will not have to quarantine. If they are unmasked and unvaccinated, more than 15 minutes, within 3 feet of somebody that is, either tested positive or somebody that has tested positive for COVID-19, then they will have to quarantine. Does that sound right to you, Becky?
I think that's the quarantining status has loosened up a lot since last year. So it used to automatically be the whole classroom had to be sent home, but that is not the case. And I will say that the SOP has been updated frequently. So I think that's why we're still, it's always subject to change. So I have it right here in the SOP, and so there really are, different criteria, but I'm happy to go through and read it if you'd like, Jill.
I'm just concerned. I think it's probably an extreme, but I think when students miss those days, it's probably the most detrimental thing that happened last year for our students, especially in the upper grades. So I just want to make sure that if you find that you are sending students home for quarantine, that we revisit the testing for the upper level kids. Because my understanding is if they do the pool testing, they can stay in school.
Yes, that's another way to,
So
yes,
I guess
that
I
is
just
true.
want to emphasize that as a board member, I want to revisit that because I do not want students quarantining, if possible, to avoid that.
I know it gets a little bit detailed and maybe too much for this, but there also has to be, for the pool testing, there has to be a minimum number of participants, right, for it to
No.
work?
No.
And do they, no?
No, this is where, I said the SOP keeps changing, and that was the case when they were putting that out in the spring, and now there's really no minimum. And so if we have a mandatory masking policy, then an exposed classroom student does not need to quarantine from regular school day activities when the student close contact was at least 3 feet from an infected student. But the pool testing would be one more way to mitigate that. And so I hear what you're saying, Jill, about that.
All right, thank you.
Were you good, Valley? Did you have your hand up, Valley? You're good? Okay.
And who won the toss for the middle level?
After this morning, Ray's not jumping out of his seat real fast.
That was a very traumatic morning. Some of us are more comfortable singing and dancing on stage than others. So the middle school plan is very similar to the high school plan, where students would be logging in to the Google Classroom to get their work and checking with that. What would necessitate a child being in a close contact is the same type of thing. So we're definitely looking at when we started we were talking 25, 30 kids, and then by the end of the year that same contact was really giving us 2 or 3 students, as the state SOP changed.
Thank you, Ray. So unlike the high school, you have an entire 6th grade of students who are not eligible for vaccination. So could you please explain the logic behind not opting for pool testing for the 6th grade?
And I think that, as Dr. Phelps said, there's pros and cons to it, and definitely something we're still looking at to make that decision. Is looking at how does it go with our neighboring districts, at the middle level. How does it go K-5 in our district, with that? Because it's there's definitely pros and cons, with that, and our biggest goal is to keep as many kids in school as possible.
And that's our goal too. So I'm wondering why, if the other elementary schools are doing pool testing, we're waiting to see how it works with them and the other districts to do it in 6th grade, because I don't see much of a difference between 6th graders and 3rd graders, honestly, in terms of risk and exposure and mitigating quarantines. And it sounds like pool testing is the best method at this point for unvaccinated students to be kept in the building learning rather than home quarantining.
And I think there is definitely, has some advantages to it. The other, is our students are going to become vaccinated throughout the school year with it, as they turn 12 during their 6th grade year. So I think it is, something that we have definitely are still looking into, and it's definitely on the plate. It hasn't said no, we're not doing it. It's just not something that's starting day one with it.
So in the meantime, while you guys figure it out, I see that the support for quarantining students is also, there'll be something posted on Google Classroom. I personally don't feel that's adequate support to learn new material, for example, especially a 6th grade student going into a new school. So is there anything else that you're planning on offering for quarantining students, especially given that we're not doing pool testing right away, in the way of some kind of mentoring or remote option for them so that they're not doing the work on their own with Google Classroom and nothing else?
In the end of last year, when we were not going synchronous, when we were in this exact same situation, the vast majority of students were able to do the Google Classroom and stay up, and others we did assign, an ed tech to as needed to be checking in to kind of help them with the executive functioning and through the lessons. And that's something that's, truly on an as needed basis at really any of our schools. It's not, universally offered, but, on an as needed basis for students that would need that, definitely available.
And do you feel that you have the resources to provide that to any student who needs it?
I think it really would depend on, how many numbers are we quarantining of kids with that. Seeing the vaccination rates of the RSU 5 students and the RSU 5 staff, definitely feeling very, hopeful going into the school year with that. This past spring when we were, really drawn pretty thin, we were able to still offer that to the students as needed.
Okay. Thank you. I'm hoping that we don't quarantine anyone, but if we do, please don't be shy and ask for help if you need it.
Yep.
I would add that with the COVID funds, you'll remember that a large amount of money was set aside for, any lagging in academic achievement. We could use it for something like that.
Thank you, Ray.
And then who is going to speak to the elementary level?
Good afternoon. So the question hits on one of the things that was most compelling for us when considering the recommendation for pool testing, because of course this was one of the really detrimental impacts of last year when students were out. So our first hope with the adoption of pool testing is that would eliminate many of the quarantines that students experienced last year. And the hope is that we're not in a situation where 10 kids in a classroom are quarantined for an extended period of time. The other thing is we have structures in place, so our teachers are creating Google Classrooms, students are versed in those practices, so we already have a forum for ensuring that kids can access assignments that are provided. The challenge is a yellow model doesn't address this problem. This is a problem we experienced last year when you might have 3 kids who are close contact on a school bus and the remaining 17 kids are still attending school daily. And we work through it much the way we do anytime our kids are sick. We have kids who are out for a week for the flu, which is to work with the family to get work that can be done independently. And then, thankfully we have medium like video now that we can provide and post in Google Classroom so students can access some direct instruction, and then to provide any remediation that's required when kids return, because we also know that families have differing capacities to engage their kids from a home environment, and we're not recommending having synchronous instruction for some students at home while peers are in school. And thankfully, through pool testing, it gives parents a choice if they want to opt in to have their students exempt from any asymptomatic quarantine. Any questions about that?
Vali?
My question is, you're doing the pool testing, and then if you have any students who test positive, you send them home to quarantine. Are they the only students who have individual results that are positive who go to quarantine?
So,
is that the way it works?
So any student, so if there's a positive case in the classroom, obviously the positive individual would then be home, as would be any students in that cohort who are not in pool testing.
Okay. Right.
And by cohort, I should say classroom or other close contact.
If they don't have assigned seating and they've been within 3 feet.
Or a lunchroom or bus close contact.
Yeah, and it is one of the reasons why the elementary principals really felt like we should recommend this, because in the lower grades, pre-K, K, kids are moving around a lot more. So it's hard to say, yes, they have assigned seats and they weren't within, they were not near that person, for 15 minutes. So that's one of the compelling reasons that made us recommend this.
So I know this was a sort of a change in direction in the last week or so to move towards pool testing, but have you guys given any thought to how you're going to, I guess market sounds bad, but I mean, really this only works if people opt in to the testing. So how do we encourage parents to participate, in the testing?
So, you okay? So interestingly, it's an interesting question, because actually we talked about this kind of at length, and at the very end of the conversation, where we landed is we got to this place where we're thinking about last year, and the feeling that we had a lot of pride that we were a district that kept asking, what can we do to serve our kids and our families? And actually, I don't think this is a hard sell, because I think we would be doing this in service of our families and in service of the public health of our kids. It's a way to say to families, you shoulder the burden last year of sometimes having your kids out when they weren't ill. And we want to offer every opportunity you can to be exempt from that and have security in going to work, having security and relative security, right, in your child's daily attendance. I'm a parent of 2 students in this district. I'm like ready to sign up in an instant. And the feedback I got from parents last year when we were calling and saying your child was a close contact, the first reaction is often not about like, oh no, like I'm worried my kid has COVID. The first reaction is, okay, like I've got to logistically think about what this means for my household. And so it felt like, honestly, our decision where we landed after lots of discussion is we're doing this for families, right? It's an additional layer of complexity for work for us that is well worth it because it will have value to families. So quite frankly, based on the families I interact with, and I don't know if the other administrators agree, I think it sells itself for enough of our families that we will get value for it in keeping kids in school. I think certainly are there families who won't do it? Absolutely. But I think for many families who are looking for security and regular school attendance for their kids, they will feel like it's a great service to them.
Thank you. Maddie.
I have a question feels like a smaller question. I'm in favor of this. I also agree with Valley's questions around 6th grade, and I'd like us to keep an eye on that. But I am noticing there's nothing in the plan that talks about mask breaks. And there's on page 10, it's not marked as page 10, but it's the page after page 9, which is marked at the bottom. It says building. It says the staff will wear face cover. I think this is just the staff, maybe. But that's what prompted the question. So the only opportunity to remove a mask is if one is in one's personal space. It's nice to have a break, and I know that lower grades have recess where that might be an opportunity. I'm not sure if it is or not, but I'm concerned about our upper grades. It sounds like in the message that went out from the high school that security is a concern, and so we're eager to get the school, doors closed again. But there's that question about those kids who are now going to be in school for a full day with a mask and no real opportunity to remove it. So has anyone thought about that?
Yes, we have thought about that. Every student will have a mask break at lunch, at recess, and then there could be, at the elementary times, there's definitely snack time. So that's at least 3 times a day at the elementary level that they would have that. And then I think that at each level, individual teachers are pretty good about taking kids, when they're outdoors, they'll be having an opportunity for the mask break. Are you just concerned that it's not written in specifically, Maddie, about, we could add that at the elementary level, there will be at least like 3 mask breaks daily. Or I could, Ray, do you want to talk about what happens at the middle level? And then Charlie, I'll have you talk about what the mask breaks looked like last year at the high school level. I don't think we put in the plan last year that, a specific number, but where possible, we're trying to provide the kids with breaks from the mask because we all realize the importance of that.
And I don't know that I necessarily need to see it in writing. I just want to hear that we're cognizant of it at all the levels.
Oh, yes, but Ray, why don't you go ahead and
So-
speak to that at the middle level, and I'll have Charlie speak to it at the high school level.
So at the
and
middle
then-
school, when we talked about it this morning with our teachers, what we talked about is, the students have basically been all summer without their masks. Their stamina for wearing the mask is not what it was last May and June. So like knowing in September, fairly regular mask breaks, most periods will have a mask break besides the lunch and the recess and that. So you're really talking to start the year, you're probably talking 6 or 7 mask breaks. And just like we did last year, as the weather gets colder and people don't really want to go outside, that number starts to wind down and down and down. And, the kids, by winter really didn't like the mask breaks as much as they did in September and June with it. But that's the plan. It's definitely, recognizing that the stamina for wearing masks is not what it was last May.
And Charlie, could you speak to the high school?
So at the high school, we have not talked to our teachers yet about the COVID protocols, but we plan on doing that tomorrow morning when we meet with them. And, you know, we're similarly to the middle school, you know, we're going to continue to encourage teachers taking students out for mask breaks during class and advisory. They will have masks off at lunch as well. And so and we also do have some outdoor learning spaces still where some teachers take advantage of those and take their kids outside for mask breaks during those times as well. So those are kind of the general mask breaks for this year.
Can I ask a question, Charlie, before you run away? I saw the move towards getting the doors locked instead of changing classes
Yes.
outside. It sounded, from what we were hearing last year, that actually went really well, the changing of class outside. It provided kids an opportunity between every period if they wanted to, because, you know, they can't eat in any of the classes, so they could eat something as they went through, they could take their masks off. Is there something that's changing the thinking on that, or is it just the desire to get the doors locked again?
Yeah, I mean, it was always a tricky balance with like school safety and being able to move outside in between classes. You know, and we recognized that balance. And it was, you know, last year, the situation with COVID, having no vaccinations, and just the reality of COVID was very different. This year, we felt, you know, as of yesterday, between 90 and 94% of our students are vaccinated. We know that now. And we felt that if, you know, that's the reality, we gotta keep in mind our school safety protocols. And having doors wide open all day is a gamble, you know, and we felt like we don't want to keep gambling with that safety. So we weighed the two options, and we decided that we felt like we should make sure our school is safe and secure now that we have 90 to 94% of our students vaccinated.
And are those the only two options? Like, is there no way to set the lock schedule? Because I think at other schools, like, they unlock in the morning for drop-off and pickup, and then they lock automatically in the times in between. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, some of our doors do that, but not all of them.
Okay.
And it gets tricky with access to like the science. You know, it would just make it very difficult for students going from one end to the other. They'd have to stay inside, and so I mean, some of our doors do that, but not all of them.
Okay. Vali?
So Charlie, how about open windows for ventilation? We know that that's one of the best mitigation strategies for COVID. Does this mean that for safety's sake, we need to close the windows too,
No.
or are all those going to remain open?
No,
On
they'll remain
screen,
open.
obviously.
Yeah. The windows will remain open. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a door issue. Yes.
Jill?
Do you have a concern with safety? Did you have an uptick in your data of things that happened last year as opposed to years past when the doors were closed?
I mean, not really. We had one incident where some intruders came into the building actually last year, and
Okay.
we are in a very public place here. You know, the highway's right there, El Bean's right there. There's lots of foot traffic around this building, and lots of cars going by this building, and you know, so I mean, it is reality for our location that we are very public, right in the middle of downtown Freeport, and it has happened. One incident happened last year. Incidents happened before last year as well. But so we're always cognizant of like that the safety and the security of this building.
So more to keep people out than to keep kids in.
Absolutely, yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. That's
Fair enough.
exactly what it is.
Thank you. Oh, Mara.
For Charlie. I had a
Oh, no.
different question, sorry.
Oh, okay.
You're good? Okay. Vali?
I have a general question, not for any administrator in particular. The 97% vaccination rate for staff, that's only for the 75% or 74% who responded. So can we get any more accuracy?
Yes, that survey just went out on Friday, and I didn't give them a specific deadline. I did send an email today, and you're talking about the staff, right? And so I sent a reminder email today, and then we have to have a response from everybody by, I think, September 15th. I have to supply that data to the state. And so you will be getting more accurate data, and then we have to do it monthly. So you'll be getting a monthly update around that. So
Okay.
we'll begin
Go ahead.
hounding. Right now it's been friendly reminders, and now it'll be, the HR department will begin reaching out probably next week to, individuals to say, what is your response to this?
Okay.
And we are requiring names. I think there are some districts that are just doing it anonymously, but we want our data to be accurate because we're basing a lot of our decisions on this. And so we are requiring people to put their names down and whether they're vaccinated. I mean, it's HR that keeps that data confidential, but we know that our data will be very accurate that we report.
Good. And is it a requirement that staff respond to the survey?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Because I have to say, if we do have a 97% response rate, then I feel one way about mandating vaccination. But at the end of the survey, we still have only 74 who say they're vaccinated. Well, actually now 74 is who have responded. But say we had 75% vaccination rate, then I do want to revisit right away the question about mandating vaccination for staff.
I'm glad you've given me the opportunity to respond to that because, like last year, this is going to be a very fluid plan. We do not plan on saying this is our plan and we're not changing anything, and so we will be revisiting that on a regular basis. So I think at any time, if we start having concerns like that, we do want to revisit. I would agree.
And would you mind sharing the finished results, the complete results, when the survey is completed?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Maura?
I had a question about the student vaccination rate. My understanding is, and first I wanted to say thank you to everyone who worked so hard on this plan. My understanding is the DOE data is an approximation, that it's not actually the data for our school district, but it's based on vaccine rates for eligible kids in our area. So I was wondering if we're planning on actually capturing vaccination data for our student population.
So I had called the DOE today to try to get clarity because there was a question from our administration on that very same thing. So Maura, as I have more information about that and understand that better myself, I'm happy to share it. When I was kind of reading about it today, I think it was based upon the kids that were in our school as of May. That they're pulling from that. But I think there are some, I'm not sure that any of us are totally clear on that. So yes, we will be trying to get updated information on that.
Okay, great, thank you. Because similar to what Vali said about staff vaccination rates, I would hope that we'd also be keeping an eye on the student data that we have, especially as more groups of students are able to get vaccinated. And then my other question was just about visitors in school. I noticed it was in the plan before. Was that taken out, or am I missing it, allowing visitors in schools this year?
We are allowing visitors in school. We're trying to be very purposeful about it, and we'll probably start slowly and then increase as we go along. But yes, we are going to allow visitors now.
Thank you.
One of the things I had when I was reading through was around, and maybe I was getting my groups mixed up, but the community programs, maybe I was looking at community programs in the red, but I was surprised to see that it was like there would be no in-person activities, but I'm guessing now when I'm looking at this now, it probably was in the red. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay.
We have been running a successful community programs all summer that
Which was
were-
why it surprised me to see it, so. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that.
And I'm happy to report we didn't have any COVID cases.
Other question? Oh, Vali?
If-
I don't see any hands flying up, so you can give them an opportunity to keep thinking with your
Okay.
question.
So this is about how we communicate the importance of participating in pool testing and continuing to encourage people to get vaccinated. So to the extent that we can, if we can just first and foremost mention this is your way out of quarantine, that's the thing that I think we need to highlight to get higher vaccination rates and higher participation rates in pool testing, because some of these terms are complicated for most people who are not reading about this all the time, but everyone knows what quarantining means. And I think if you tell them this is your way to avoid quarantining, I think we're going to have much higher participation rates for both vaccination and pool testing.
Yeah, thank you for that tip. And my plan is to have a communication out by the end of the week based upon your vote tonight.
Other questions or comments on the plan? Susanna?
Just a quick clarification on the pool testing. Is this something that students can opt in and out of throughout the year? So if they can change their, okay, thank you.
And it says it on the elementary green level, the pool testing. But I believe you said at Durham, they're going to do it K-8.
Yes, they are.
So if there was 7th and 8th grade parents, they could
Yes.
opt in for that? Okay. Any other comments, questions, thoughts? Jen?
Mine was just an agenda. Usually we have 2 public comments, and we didn't have a public comment at the end of the meeting.
Well, technically, the end of the meeting is after the retreat,
Oh, okay,
because we don't adjourn.
gotcha.
Okay. But, I mean, I'm, if the board is okay with it, I'm fine if we wanted to add a public comment before we went into our retreat. I just saw some folks did come in after we started talking, and I know we started our meeting a little earlier than we typically do, so I certainly don't want to discourage folks from participating. So after we finish our discussion, before we vote, we'll have an opportunity for folks to have a comment. And I had something else you said triggered something in my head, but I don't know what it was. Okay. So any other comments, questions? Oh, I remembered it. Thank you. I appreciate the thought process around not setting the criteria today for how do we unmask, and can we unmask at certain levels but not all levels. But I appreciate the willingness to consider, always going back and revisiting that, because I do think, there may be a point this year based on what we're learning over the next few months, where it does make sense at certain schools when, if vaccination levels of staff and students do, exceed a certain percent and we're not really seeing any, cases and outbreaks, it might make sense to revisit that. So I appreciate the willingness to revisit that over time. I think that's going to be helpful for keeping people motivated, and keep doing the right things. So thank you for that. Okay, that was Maddie.
So with that thought, if we vote to approve the plan today, whatever time it is, and keep the criteria undefined for unmasking, does that mean that we as a board will vote to approve that at that time? Or is voting to approve the plan giving you the authority, Becky, to make that decision without our approval?
Right, because last year, part of the plan was to, not specific to masking, but, to move between the red, the yellow, the green. That was within the administrator's abilities.
I think that could be either way, and that would be, to me, up to the discretion of the board.
I feel like it's one of those important things that, you know, just from a transparency standpoint and from a, you know, a public perception standpoint, so that at least they can see the conversation, you know, regardless of what the board decides to do moving forward, masking or unmasking, the fact that they can see it, comment on it, and be involved in the, because it is a pretty big issue. I guess I would come down on the side of thinking it should probably come back to the board. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate that. I don't want to find us in another straw poll situation, given that we don't know, you know, if Delta's the last variant, you know, if there's something else coming down the pike. I want us to have the opportunity to weigh all of that and make a board decision at the time.
Oh, I think I've heard Lambda's already out there.
Oh, great.
Okay. Is the board happy with their discussion? Good at this point? Okay. So we will open up public comments. Same spiel as before. We just ask you come up to the mic, share your name, where you're from, and try and keep comments to 3 minutes or less. And small may be moot if our members of the public aren't interested in speaking, but certainly want to give them that opportunity.
Hi, I'm Joe Miliascio, Freeport, just graduated my last kid from the RSU last year. I have a question about not this topic necessarily. Is this public comment on any part of the meeting?
So yeah, our public comment, we leave it very open, so it's generally not
All right,
not necessarily a conversation, but anything you just want to share with us.
thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
All right, so one, my quick comment was listening to all of you talk just now about the reopening, and you know, this is an educational institution. So what I would hope too, that, and I have a background in this, in immunology, biology, diagnostics. I would ask that you in the school consider adding some curriculum to the STEM programs for things around COVID. These kids are living with a mask on them. Let's teach them how to critically think. Put something in the curriculum about, you know, data analysis, normal population distributions. And then I'll ask you one more time to consider teaching kids actually what the heck these things are doing, okay? Because I've seen stuff that, you know, people are putting cut up t-shirts over their face. And I'll tell you, a 50 to a 500 nanometer particle doesn't care if I'm going through the armpit of an old worn out t-shirt that's across my face. So if you're gonna go to all this step of, you know, exposing kids to higher CO2, carbon monoxide emissions, which do have an effect and has been shown on their learning, at least let's make sure that the masks they are wearing are doing the things that you are intending them to do. So this is the opposite of how I normally think, but you might want to do some kind of mask inspection and minimum standard. But yes, please make this part of your curriculum. And the last thing I was going to ask is, and sorry I missed the beginning comment. It is an earlier meeting and I had to juggle some work, but on topic number 3, when you go into your retreat in session, I think it's great, good discussion. A lot of people will be able to watch this. But more disturbingly, you are opening the retreat discussions up, except for a part where you will go into executive session, which means the public can't hear what's going on. They have to leave the room. You won't be able to view it. And the topics, to me, for what you're going into executive session for, do not necessarily, in my mind, I've been a counselor, I've been in public office before, have training on this, but I would love to hear why you believe going into executive session for boardsmanship on topics of things like the role of a board member, or how do you distinguish your personal beliefs from those views of around your board role, What's the role of a member of the board? I think that's a topic that there's no controversy, nothing secret about that. And for candidates that may come after you, probably when you were candidates thinking about the school board, these were all questions that you had. And oftentimes, I think that member's gone now, but I do remember one person, two members of the school board in the past always tell me, I don't represent the citizens. I represent the children and the education, and that's my role. So these are very current topics that you're all talking about, and I think I'd encourage you not to go in, but I could also understand you might need to when you get to the Q&A portion, because maybe one of your questions is sensitive to a particular incident or something like that. So try to work this into curriculum. Happy to consult with biology, statistics teachers, AP, and please, if you don't have to go into executive session, I'd really be interested in hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't think we have anyone else, members of the public, for public comment. Okay. All right then, so we will move forward with our vote on new business. So do I have a motion for consideration and approval of the 2021-2022 RSU 5 reopening of school plan? Susanna? Second, Maddie? Any other questions or comments before we vote? I do have to say I'm very excited we can vote with hands again. No more roll call votes. All right, all those in favor? None opposed. Great, thank you. All right, to Joe's point, so our workshop is the next portion of our board meeting. The executive session piece is at the recommendation of the attorneys, so obviously they're the ones who weigh in on whether we are allowed or not to be in executive session. But I think his point is a good one around sort of the general information, and it's something we can think about, you know, maybe at a different time to have a session that's a public session. All right, so are we voting to go into executive session now? Yeah, right, okay. All right, so do I have a motion for consideration and approval to enter into executive session as outlined in 1 MRSA section 4056E to consult with legal counsel on the legal rights and duties of the school board? Lindsay and Jen, thank you. All those in favor? Oh, sorry, yes, discussion.
So can we have at least a presentation describing what the role of the board member is in public and then go into executive session? Can we consider that? I mean, we have our attorney here. We can ask
Well,
her.
the thing is, I just don't know how the presentation was set up to, if it's conducive for, like, I think it was more around specific questions from the board.
Yeah, although we have it every year, and my recollection is that it's
We
pretty
don't have it
vanilla
every
in the
year.
beginning. It's
We
just an
haven't had it in
explanation.
several years.
No?
Mhm. Yeah.
We always
It
have an
feels like
attorney.
we've
Yeah.
done it several times.
Yeah, I feel like
but-
I've been in this portion many times. Anyhow, since we have our attorney here, could we at least ask what the presentation looks like, whether there's
Sure.
anything that should be in executive session?
We can ask.
I mean, it'd be nice to accommodate.
The other thing that I just,
I think we also released our tech people and told them that they were here just for this part, so. I don't-
but-
not that we should, mandate it for that, but.
well, I also think that, you've had the precedent of not videotaping the retreat, so that's the only part that I don't know whether you want to start.
No, and I don't mean the entire retreat. I mean just the presentation describing the role of board
Oh,
members.
I see. Melissa, would you go up to and I'll try to rephrase the question. So we've just had someone in public comment that had looked at our agenda and said that they felt like it would be beneficial for the public to be able to hear about your kind of presentation on general boardsmanship. And is there any reason why we couldn't have that in public session? I know in the past, I've been advised when our attorneys are giving PD to the board, it's better to go into executive session, but I'm not sure that it's required.
It's definitely not required. You can do whatever you want, and if it is the will of the board for me to do this in public, as long as you let me take off my sweater, I'm happy to do it anyway.
Yeah, so what we could do is, sort of do your general presentation, and then as we get to questions, then maybe that's when we can take it into executive session. And just for people's information around our retreats in the past, we have not videoed them, but they have been, other than an executive session where the attorney has come in, they have been open to the public, but just not videoed. So if somebody came and wanted to watch, they certainly could, but, not the executive session piece, so. So is the general consensus of the board that we're comfortable with Melissa providing the presentation in open session? And then we can move into executive session for questions.
Excuse me, I understand the reasoning behind the ask. I just feel that our agenda has been out and it was clear of what we were going to do tonight. And I just feel like changing it on a whim, that makes me a little uncomfortable. But in the future, if we wanted to address that, that would be good.
Yeah, I agree that we don't want to change our agenda,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure it changes our agenda. It just changes when we turn the camera off.
Yeah, okay.
But that's why I'm interested to hear what the thoughts of the board are. Maddie?
I just wonder if there's another way to address this. I mean, I wonder if there could be a write-up or an article that's posted on our website and that we put out on our social media, or even, I was considering like Becky could write about it, but I don't think I'd prefer for Becky to write about our kids and what's happening in our schools. Maybe Michelle, you could guest write one.
Oh, God.
I don't know. I feel like there are other ways we could potentially do this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I'm fine with that. Whether it's, maybe it's something on a future agenda, where people could watch or we could talk about it. Yeah, Lindsay?
I feel like it just deserves a place on the RSU 5 website somewhere. It would be great public education for people.
And then anybody who's running for office, we can direct them right there.
I'm sure we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, I'm sure the writing is out there somewhere as long as it's sourced. But yeah, I think it's a great question that he brings, and I've never had the training, and I probably needed it. But I think it just needs a place
Its own
to
spot.
live.
Perfect. So we have a motion on the floor and we have a second. So I would suggest that if you are in favor of moving into executive session and then we find a future spot on a future agenda or place on the website, then that would be a yes vote. If you would like to keep this session in public, then I would say that is a no vote. Is that fair? Okay. All those in favor of going into executive session? Opposed? Got it, Cynthia? I do. Okay, perfect. All right, so we will take a minute to turn off the cameras and anyone who needs to go outside for a mask break, we'll re-adjourn shortly.